Good day. Over my lifetime, I have read close to 2,000 books. I have read pretty much the entirety of the Star Wars Expanded Universe and a goodly chunk of the Star Trek universe. And that, of course, does not take into account all the other science fiction and fantasy books that I've read throughout my life as well. But of it all, my favorite book of all time is not an Alien book, it's not a Predator book, it's not a Star Wars book, it's not a Star Trek book, but instead it is a relatively obscure standalone book known as Wildside.
The reason why I absolutely love Wildside is the fact that the protagonist and the characters are all fairly realistic. Not only that, but the book itself covers pretty much every concept and hobby and passion that I had when I first read it. And in many respects, I still have most of those concepts, hobbies, and passions now as well.
I first read this book when I was but a callow youth of 12. And at the time, I had a considerable interest in guns, and I actually had a considerable interest in exploring. In fact, I used to explore the woods near my home all the time. Unfortunately, those woods now are 2 apartment complexes and a grocery store. Progress. Wonderful, isn't it? Also, I had a significant interest in aviation. In fact, all I wanted to be when I got older was a pilot, until I actually tried to learn how to fly and found out that I got motion sickness. Even when I took motion sickness pills, so that dream died a wonderful death, didn't it? But anyway, dreams dying aside, I also like the concept of a youthful hero. Because let's face it, we all like heroes, but most of us would like to actually be one. And so if you're young, you'd like to think that, well, I could possibly do that too.
The cover is really basic and lackluster and definitely belies the quality of this book. Basically, it's just a wooden frame with a saber-toothed tiger's disembodied head in the middle. Also, look at the background. That frames the saber-toothed tiger's head. It looks like its head is coming from hell! The wooden frame is supposed to represent the frame around the portal that leads to the Wildside, an alternate Earth where humanity never evolved. And that is supposed to be a veritable paradise, not a hellscape. Also, saber-toothed tigers did not actually appear outside of the first page where the uncle of the main character shoots a juvenile one. In fact, the protagonists only have to fight one mountain lion and not waves of sabers. While the cover may be crap, the book is not, so let's reverently open it up and take a look. The book is told from the first-person perspective of Charles Newell. The first part of the book sets up the character of Charles fairly well. While he is 18, he is in fact highly responsible and fairly capable, more so than many people his age and beyond. The book itself takes place in 1995 in Texas.
Right there, the book gets about 2,000 points in its favor because I happen to just be from that particular geographical location, and I also happen to rather like it as well. And it's also nice to actually read about geographical locations that I actually can recognize. Highway 6 in Westheimer, FTW!
The first chapter also introduces the other protagonists. Basically, they're his 4 friends. You have Joey, or as I like to call him, Drunk Guy, because he likes to get drunk a lot. And also, at the beginning of the book, already has a DWI. He fulfills the requirement of the idiot! You then have Marie, who is Joey's girlfriend, and serves as the intellectual equal of Charles, and of course, she is pined after by Charles. But that issue is wrapped up fairly well. You then have Rick, who is the resident cretin of the group, and then finally you have Clara, who is the down-to-earth member of the group. The first chapter details prom night for Charles and the gang, and really, despite it being on a really boring subject, the first chapter is actually pretty compelling. It does a decent job building characterization.
So after the prom night introductions, Charles takes the team out to his ranch.
Yes, we will get into Charles's ranch later, but he takes them there to show them that he has passenger pigeons, a species of pigeon that has been rendered extinct.
A short time later, he shows his friends that he has an intergalactic space portal. And then he decides to start selling his passenger pigeons so that he can generate some initial capital to begin profiting off the Wildside.
The pigeons net the team $500,000, which is more than enough to begin preparations. The book goes into great detail about all the preparations that Charles and the team undertake.
Now, before the Wildside group can even do anything, they must first train. Now, currently, Charles and Marie are the only ones that can fly a plane, and so Charles elects to put the rest of the group through flight training. And then, knowing that they have to first prepare the ground before they can even land the plane, Charles puts everyone, including himself, through skydiving training. And then, as an added bit of safety, Charles and Marie go through aircraft mechanics school. And really, reading about these preparations are really the most important parts of the book, and they're also some of the most entertaining parts of the book as well. And Stephen Gould does a great job of making reading about somebody going through a training course actually entertaining.
And that is one of the best aspects about this book. The base building is really quite compelling. And eventually, Charles and the team construct Wildside Base, from which they will launch their various missions. The first mission they undertake is the construction of various fuel depots, because Charles's main objective is to mine gold. So in order to get to easily accessible gold, they have to fly all the way to Colorado, which they can't safely do in one trip.
Really, if you like how it sounds, track down a copy. You will not be disappointed. So now, let's take a look at the characters.
Charles Newell is awesome, and reminds me a bit of myself, except for the fact that it is said early on in the book that he is rather fat, which I never really have been. Also, early on in the book, you kind of feel like he is rather pathetic, because in the opening chapter, he drives his friends to the prom and pretends that he's their chauffeur, and he then just sort of mopes around in a restaurant that is located outside of the prom area. And also, he pines after Marie, the one woman he can never have. Yes, the Linkin Park music is starting up, isn't it? But you know what?
Charles deserves no sympathy whatsoever. At the beginning of the book, let's see how well off he is. Okay, he's got his own interdimensional portal. He knows about it at the beginning of the book. He also has his own ranch, more or less, with a 2-story house. So what if he's having some relationship problems? He still is pretty bloody well off, I'd say. He probably just thinks he's so much better than me. I know it's kind of a stretch, but you know, he's got his ranch, he's got his multiple planes, he's got his intergalactic space portal. You know what?
I'm gonna go build my own theme park with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the park.
The other characters are pretty good, if a bit stereotypical. Joey is the stereotypical Texas drunk, but then again, there is some truth to that stereotype, and Claire is the stereotypical down-to-earth Texas woman that also just so happens to have a horse, because as we all know, so many Texans have horses. Really, for the first half of the book, Charles' friends exist as almost a sort of slight antagonist, because they sometimes get into trouble like Drunk Guy who decides to go and drive drunk again, despite already having a DWI. This, of course, causes a great deal of trouble for Charles, who, of course, forgives him. Now, if it were up to me, he'd probably penalized with losing half of his shares, having to clean the airplane tires with a toothbrush, but then again, I'm not as forgiving as Charles is.
Now, Charles did a great job preparing to profit off the wild side, and many of his preparations were spot on. But you know me, there is one area where I would definitely have done it differently. And that, of course, is the guns.
The main armament for the team was a Mossberg 500 shotgun that had a pistol grip instead of a standard stock. This was done because it was used as a jump gun, and it worked quite well. But if I were running the show, I would have had 2 other guns issued in addition to that one. I would have bought 5 M1903 Springfields, mainly because they were ruggedly designed and would have been able to stand up to a great deal of punishment, and I would have added a scope to the rifle as well. Now, no one could actually have jumped with it, but at least one could have been carried on the plane, so that longer range targets or larger targets could have been engaged successfully. And finally, the SKS. It has a good rate of fire, decent ammo capacity, and it can be modified to accept larger capacity magazines, and overall it's a sturdy rifle that can easily be used to fight large groups of carnivorous animals. Really, while a 12 gauge shotgun is powerful, it does not have the cyclic rate and the ammo capacity to deal with large groups of enemies. This book does indeed deserve either a film or miniseries adaptation. It would not cost that much to make, and if done right, would be highly entertaining. Now, there are only 2 people in existence that I would trust to create such a film. Myself, or J.J. Abrams, as he did make Super 8 the only film to ever show competent young people.
Surprisingly enough, the book actually had a web ad made for it.
This ad was made back in 1996, and while fairly simple by today's standards, back in the day it would have been seen as rather remarkable, if it could have been seen at all, since internet in 1996 was really slow, with large external modems. In the end, the ad was actually fairly well made, and a book as good as Wildside deserves to have such a forward-thinking piece of marketing.
Wildside can be a little hard to find. You can usually find used copies on Amazon fairly cheap, and if you have a Kindle, you can get it for that. But either way, get it. You will definitely not be disappointed. And so, this is General Lots wishing you good, Area 7. Good jumper, or whatever makes you happy.